If she plays piano, I quit, laughed the principal, not knowing the black girl was already legend. Hello again, my friends. I want you to come with me for a moment. Forget where you are. In your mind, picture a grand, intimidating hall. The floors are polished marble that gleams under crystal chandeliers. The air is cool, and it smells of old wood and expensive perfume. On the walls, portraits of stern-faced, long-gone composers look down, their eyes seeming to judge every soul who enters. This is the Royal Conservatory of Music. For many, it's a temple, a dream. For others, it's a fortress, with walls built not of stone, but of tradition and privilege. And on this particular day, the air wasn't just filled with the scent of polish. It was thick with tension. It was audition day. Young musicians, barely out of their teens, sat on velvet benches, their backs straight, their faces pale. They clutched expensive tablets, their entire life's work, their concertos and sonatas, digitized on those sleek screens. Their clothes whispered of money, of private tutors, of summers spent at music camps in the Alps. They were the chosen ones, groomed for this moment since they could barely walk. And then there was her. Her name was Ilara Vance. She walked in alone, 17 years old, with a quietness that seemed to draw all the sound from the room. She didn't wear the uniform of the privileged. Her clothes were simple, clean, but undeniably worn. And in her hands she held paper. Simple, old-fashioned sheet music, the corners softened from countless turnings. Can you see her? A single, still figure in a sea of shimmering anxiety. She felt the weight of every stare. She heard the whispers that weren't meant to be whispers. Where is she from? Look at her music. Is that paper? A muffled giggle. This should be good. But the most dangerous sound wasn't the giggling. It was the soft, almost silent click of cell phones being unlocked, cameras being primed. They weren't preparing to capture genius. They were preparing to capture a train wreck. They had come to see a tragedy, and they were sure they'd found their star. At the front of the hall, at a long table, sat the judges, and among them, a man who seemed to be carved from the same marble as the floors, Director Alistair Croft. He had silver hair, cold blue eyes, and a smile that never quite reached them. He was a king in his castle, and he surveyed his domain with a bored, superior air. It was his laughter that shattered the quiet first. It was loud, mocking, and it echoed cruelly in the high ceiling. He leaned over to the judge beside him, a kinder-faced woman named Professor Anya Sharma, but he didn't bother to lower his voice. He wanted everyone to hear. He pointed a well-manicured finger directly at Ilara, standing vulnerably in the center of the stage. If she plays the piano, he declared, his voice dripping with contempt, I quit right now. A wave of nervous laughter swept through the students. They looked to him for their cue, and he had given it. This girl was a joke, an amusement, and in the center of that storm, Ilara Vance stood firm. Her heart, I imagine, was pounding like a wild drum against her ribs. But when she spoke, her voice was clear and calm, and cut through the noise like a blade. Excuse me, sir? Director Croft leaned forward, his chin resting on his steepled fingers. That cold, condescending smile was still plastered on his face. My dear, he began, as if explaining something to a very small child. This is the Royal Conservatory, the most exclusive conservatory in the country. Our students begin their training at 4 years old. They have the best private tutors in the world. They have pedigree. He let the word hang in the air. Pedigree. Like they were prize poodles. Do you truly believe, he continued, the smile widening, that you can just walk in here and compete with that? Professor Sharma shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Alistair, perhaps we should just let her, she started, her voice gentle. But Croft cut her off with a sharp wave of his hand. No, Anya. Let her try. It will be educational for everyone. He turned back to the other judges, his eyes sparkling with malicious glee. Shall we place a wager? I give her less than 2 minutes before she gives up. This was the moment. This was the point where most people would have crumbled, where the dream would have curdled into humiliation. They would have turned and run, and that would have been the end of the story. But Ilara was not most people. She didn't run. She didn't cry. She simply turned, and she walked towards the piano at the center of the stage. It was a magnificent Steinway concert grand, a beast of polished ebony, an instrument that probably cost more than the house Ilara shared with her grandmother. As she walked towards it, it must have felt like approaching a throne she was never meant to touch. Her hands, you see, were not accustomed to such perfection. They were hands that knew the feel of worn, chipped ivory. The slightly stiff action of the old, out-of-tune upright piano in the basement of the Northwood Community Center, where she had practiced for 8 hours a day, every day, for the past 9 years. Her fingers, in that moment, must have felt clumsy and unworthy. Croft watched her, enjoying his performance. He stood up, addressing the entire auditorium like a ringmaster. You know what? He announced, his voice booming. I'm going to make this interesting. A public bet. If this young woman can play Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, and when I say play, I mean really play it, not just hammer at the keys, I will resign from my position as director of this academy. It wasn't a slow clap that built. It was an explosion. 1 student, then 10, then the entire auditorium rocketed to their feet. The sound was deafening. A roaring, weeping, shouting wave of pure, unadulterated awe. It wasn't just applause. It was a release. It was the sound of prejudice being shattered into a million pieces. People were crying openly, strangers turning to each other with wide, disbelieving eyes, united by the beauty they had just witnessed. Professor Anya Sharma was the first of the judges to stand, her chair scraping back, her hands clasped together as if in prayer, tears streaming freely down her face. She wasn't applauding a student. She was bearing witness to an artist. Ilara slowly lifted her hands from the keys. She stood up, turning to face the roaring crowd. And there was no smirk of victory on her face, no gloating. There was only a quiet, profound dignity. The same dignity she had carried onto the stage, which now seemed to glow even brighter. She was still Ilara from Northwood. The music hadn't changed who she was. It had simply shown everyone who she had always been. Her eyes scanned the cheering faces, but then they settled. They found their target. Director Alistair Croft was still sitting. He looked like a man who had just been told the world was ending. All the color had drained from his face, leaving a pale, waxy mask. His expensive tie suddenly seemed like a noose. The roaring applause was a funeral dirge for his career, and he knew it. Ilara waited. She let the ovation continue for a full minute, the sound washing over her, a balm on old wounds. Then, she took a small step forward. She didn't raise her hands for quiet. She simply stood, and her stillness began to calm the storm. The hall gradually grew quiet again, every person straining to hear what she would say. She looked directly at Croft, her gaze steady and clear. "Mr. Croft," she said, and her voice, though soft, carried to every corner of the room. "I believe you have something to fulfill." The words were not spoken with malice. They were spoken with the simple, unassailable force of truth. They hung in the air, as final as the chord she had just played. All eyes swiveled to the director. The cell phones, which had captured the entire performance, now zoomed in on his face, broadcasting his humiliation live to the world. He tried to stand, but his legs seemed to buckle. He had to grip the table for support. "Ilara, he stammered, his voice a dry rasp. Perhaps we can discuss this in my office, privately." But a murmur of disapproval rippled through the crowd. A student shouted from the back, "A deal's a deal." Another voice joined in. "You said it in public." The world he had built, a world of backroom deals and unspoken rules, was crumbling. The modern world, with its cameras and its demand for transparency, was holding him accountable. It was Professor Sharma who spoke next, her voice firm and loud, addressing him but speaking for the room. "Alistair, your promise was public. Your answer should be too." There was no escape. He was trapped in the cage of his own making. He looked at the sea of faces, once respectful, now looking at him with contempt, with pity, with anger. He saw the glowing screens of the phones, and he knew that clips of this moment were already being uploaded, shared, and liked. His reputation, built over a lifetime of careful networking and arrogant posturing, was evaporating in real time. He swallowed a painful, dry click in his throat. He began, his voice breaking. I will submit my resignation to the board tomorrow morning." The words landed not with a bang, but with a sickening thud. There was no cheer, just a heavy, solemn silence. Justice had been served, but it tasted bitter. It was a necessary victory, but it revealed a deep, festering sickness in the heart of this beautiful institution. And in that silence, a new sound emerged. The sound of a door at the back of the auditorium softly opening and closing. An older man with kind, intelligent eyes walked slowly down the center aisle. It was Professor David Reed, the retired concert pianist who had been Ilara's secret mentor, her guiding star. He had been watching from the shadows all along. He walked right up to the stage, ignoring the shattered director completely. He looked up at Ilara, his own eyes shining with tears, and he gave a small, proud nod. "Ilara Vance," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you have not only played Rachmaninoff, you have just given one of the most profoundly moving performances I have ever been privileged to hear. It would be the honor of my life to help guide your career." And with that, the dam broke. Other judges rushed forward, offering cards, making promises. The narrative in the room had irrevocably shifted from "can she?" to "we must have her." But let's leave the roaring auditorium for a moment. Let's follow the threads of this story as they spread out, like ripples from a stone thrown into a still pond. The video, of course, went viral. It wasn't just a clip. It was a modern-day parable. "Girl from the wrong side of the tracks humiliates elitist director," the headline screamed. It was discussed on news channels, analyzed by music critics, and shared by millions who saw in Ilara a reflection of their own struggles against a system that seemed designed to keep them out. For Ilara, life became a whirlwind. The tiny flat she shared with her grandmother was flooded with letters and emails, contract offers from major record labels, invitations to play with orchestras in London, Berlin, New York. The dream she had clung to so fiercely was now unfolding before her, bigger and brighter than she had ever dared to imagine. And one day, the call came. Her manager, now the ever-loyal Professor Reed, held the phone with a trembling hand. "Carnegie Hall," he whispered, his voice full of wonder. "They want you as the principal soloist for the spring season." It was the dream of every classical musician in the world, and it was being offered to the girl who practiced on a community center piano. Meanwhile, in a small, sparse apartment across town, a different story was unfolding. Alistair Croft's resignation was only the beginning. The viral video made him a pariah. No other conservatory would touch him. The phone that once rang constantly with invitations was silent. His wife, unable to bear the social ostracism, had left him. The portraits of famous composers that once adorned his lavish office were now packed in boxes, leaning against a bare wall. He was alone. The king had been dethroned, and his castle was empty. One evening, he saw a news segment about Ilara's upcoming debut. He watched her on the screen, poised, graceful, and talented beyond measure. And for the first time, stripped of his title and his arrogance, he was forced to see her not as a problem, but as a person, a brilliant, once-in-a-generation artist whom he had tried to destroy out of pure, unvarnished snobbery. A single, bitter tear traced a path down his cheek. He had not only lost his career, he had been on the wrong side of history. Back at the Royal Conservatory, a revolution was taking place. The new director, a forward-thinking man appointed from the board, stood before the press with Professor Sharma by his side. "Talent exists everywhere," he announced. "Our failure was in looking for it only in the usual places. That ends today." He announced new needs-blind scholarships, outreach programs in communities like Northwood, and a committee, led by Professor Sharma, to dismantle the systemic biases in their audition process. Ilara's performance had been the earthquake. Now the rebuilding could begin. But for Ilara, the most important moment of her new life came not on a glamorous stage, but back in a familiar, humble basement. She returned to the Northwood Community Center. The old, out-of-tune piano was gone. In its place stood a beautiful new, full-size Steinway. A small, golden plaque on it read, "For every dream that waits for its chance." Donated by Ilara Vance. The children of the center surrounded her, their eyes wide with wonder. They touched the piano. They touched her dress. They saw in her a future they had never thought possible. Her grandmother, Donna May, stood to the side, her hands clasped under her chin, her body shaking with silent, joyful sobs. All the sacrifices, all the early mornings, all the quiet years of belief had led to this. Her granddaughter had not just become a star, she had become a beacon. "Play for us, Ilara," one of the children begged. And so, she sat, not on a stage under spotlights, but in a basement filled with the ghosts of her own past. She placed her hands on the keys of the piano her success had bought, and she played. Not Rachmaninoff this time, but something simpler, something filled with joy and hope. The sound that filled the room was not just music. It was a promise that the next Ilara Vance would not have to fight so hard to be heard. The final scene of our story takes us to that hallowed hall, Carnegie Hall, the night of her debut. The air was electric. The house was sold out. In the audience sat her grandmother, beaming in a new dress. Professor Reed, nervously clutching his program. Professor Sharma, smiling through tears. And in the cheap seats, rows and rows of young people from neighborhoods like Northwood, their hearts bursting with possibility. Ilara walked onto the stage, the spotlight finding her. She looked out at the sea of faces, a vast, silent ocean waiting for her music. She saw the hope in those young eyes, and she saw the love in her grandmother's. She sat at the piano, and in the hush, she spoke softly into the microphone. "They told me I didn't belong," she said, her voice clear and steady. "They told me my dream was too big. They tried to make me small." She paused, a small, knowing smile touching her lips. "But my grandmother taught me that the best answer to prejudice is not anger. It is excellence." She turned to the keys, and as she played, filling that legendary hall with a sound so beautiful it hurt, The truth of her story settled over everyone present. Alistair Croft had tried to break her, but he had only broken the walls that needed breaking. Her revenge was not his downfall. Her revenge was her success. Her revenge was this music, right here, right now, changing lives. He had tried to make the world smaller for her, and in response, she had grown so immense that her greatness could no longer be contained. And as the final, glorious notes of her encore piece faded, and the roaring standing ovation began, one thing was crystal clear. Ilara Vance hadn't just played a concerto. She had played a new world into being. If this story of overcoming adversity touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories that show how true excellence always finds its way, regardless of the obstacles that try to block it.